The wind howled like a living thing across the plains of Wyoming territory, carrying with it sheets of rain that slammed horizontal against anything foolish enough to stand in its path. And Hannah Dalton knew she had made a terrible mistake leaving the shelter of the mercantile when the storm clouds had still been gathering on the horizon. It was June of 1878, and she had lived in Riverton long enough to know that summer storms could turn violent without warning. But she had been desperate to reach home before the deluge started, her arms full of supplies for the boarding house she ran with her mother. Now she was paying for her impatience as the storm raged around her with a fury that made the wooden buildings of Riverton creak and groan like ships at sea. The rain had turned the main street into a river of mud within minutes, and Hannah struggled to keep her footing as she pushed forward, her skirts heavy with water and clinging to her legs. She was only 22 years old, but she had learned resilience early after her father died in a mining accident 4 years ago, leaving her and her mother to fend for themselves. They had turned their modest home into a boarding house that catered to ranch hands, traveling merchants, and the occasional drifter passing through town. It was honest work, and it kept them fed, though there were nights when Hannah wondered if this was all there would ever be to her life. The wind tore at her bonnet, and she clutched her bundle tighter as she hurried past the saloon. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the street in stark white relief, and in that moment, Hannah saw the old Whitfield place ahead, its porch sagging and abandoned. The Whitfields had moved east 2 months ago, leaving the house to slowly deteriorate under the harsh Wyoming weather. Hannah knew she should have gone around it, but the storm was growing worse by the second, and she thought she might find a moment of shelter under the overhang. She stumbled up the steps, grateful for even the minimal protection from the rain, and pressed herself against the wall of the house. The wood beneath her feet groaned ominously, but she was too focused on catching her breath to pay attention. Another crack of lightning split the air, this one so close she could smell the ozone, and the thunder that followed shook the ground beneath her feet. That was when she heard the terrible splintering sound, like bones breaking, and suddenly the world tilted sideways. The porch collapsed beneath her in a chaos of rotting wood and rusted nails. Hannah screamed as she fell, her supplies scattering as heavy beams crashed down around her. Pain exploded through her left leg as one of the main support beams landed across it, pinning her to the ground. Another beam fell across her torso, knocking the wind from her lungs and trapping her arms. Panic surged through her as she tried to move and found herself completely immobilized, the weight of the collapsed structure pressing down on her chest and making it hard to breathe. The rain poured down through the gaps in the wreckage, streaming into her eyes and mouth as she gasped for air. She tried to scream again, but her voice came out as barely more than a wheeze. The pain in her leg was excruciating, and she could feel something wet that might have been blood mixing with the rainwater. She struggled against the beams, but they were impossibly heavy, and every movement sent fresh waves of agony through her body. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Hannah could not tell any more as the storm raged on and the water rose around her. She thought about her mother, who would be frantic with worry. She thought about all of the things she had never done, never seen, never experienced. She thought about how unfair it was to die like this, trapped and alone, with no one even knowing where she was. Then, through the roar of the storm, she heard a voice. "Hello? Is someone there?" It was a man's voice, deep and urgent, and Hannah tried to call out but managed only a weak croak. She heard footsteps splashing through the water, coming closer, and then a face appeared through a gap in the wreckage. Even through her pain and fear, she registered that it belonged to a man in his mid-20s with dark hair plastered to his head by the rain and eyes that were striking even in the dim light filtering through the storm clouds. "Dear God," he said, his voice filled with alarm. "Hold on, miss. I'm going to get you out of there." He disappeared from view, and Hannah felt a fresh wave of panic that he had left her, but then she heard him moving around the collapsed porch, assessing the situation. She could hear him talking to himself, working through the problem, and despite her pain, she felt a small flicker of hope. "This is going to hurt," he called out to her, "but I need you to stay as still as possible. Can you do that for me?" Hannah managed a small noise of assent, and then she felt the beam across her torso shift slightly. The man grunted with effort, and she realized he was trying to lift it. It was impossibly heavy, waterlogged wood that must have weighed hundreds of pounds, but somehow he was moving it. She heard his boots scraping against the ground as he braced himself, heard his labored breathing as he strained against the weight. "Come on," he muttered through gritted teeth, and then, with a tremendous effort that seemed almost superhuman, he lifted the beam enough to roll it off her torso. Hannah gasped as the pressure released from her chest, gulping in air like a drowning woman. But there was no time to recover because the man was already moving to the beam across her leg. "This one's worse," he said, more to himself than to her. "It's wedged in at an angle. Miss, when I lift this, you need to pull yourself free as fast as you can. I don't know how long I can hold it." Through the haze of pain, Hannah understood. She positioned her hands as best she could, ready to drag herself backward the moment the weight lifted. She watched as the man planted his feet, wrapped his arms around the massive beam, and began to lift. The muscles in his arms and shoulders stood out in sharp relief as he strained against the weight, his face contorting with the effort. For a moment, nothing happened, and Hannah thought it was simply too heavy, that even this stranger's remarkable strength would not be enough. But then the beam began to move, rising inch by agonizing inch. The man let out a roar of effort, and suddenly the beam was up, held at chest height by sheer force of will. "Now!" he shouted, and Hannah scrambled backward, ignoring the screaming pain in her leg as she dragged herself free. The moment she was clear, the man let the beam drop with a tremendous crash, stumbling backward himself. He caught himself against what remained of the porch steps, breathing hard, then immediately turned his attention back to her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, already moving to her side and kneeling in the mud. "Can you stand?" Hannah tried to answer, but the shock and pain were catching up with her now that the immediate danger had passed. Her leg was definitely injured, possibly broken, and she could see a gash on her forearm that was bleeding freely. The man did not wait for an answer. He shrugged out of his coat despite the rain and wrapped it around her shoulders, then slid one arm under her knees and the other behind her back. "I'm going to carry you to Doc Morrison's place," he said. "It's not far, just hold on to me." He lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing, and Hannah found herself pressed against his chest as he straightened up. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, incongruously calm despite what he had just done, and she realized she was shaking uncontrollably. "You're safe now," he said quietly, his voice close to her ear as he began walking through the storm. "I've got you." Hannah let her head rest against his shoulder, too exhausted and hurt to do anything else. Through the rain, she could make out his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the concentration in his expression as he navigated the flooded street. She wanted to ask his name, to thank him, but the words would not come. Instead, she simply held on as he carried her through the storm, each step taking her further from what had nearly been her grave. Doc Morrison's office was on the far side of town, attached to his home, and by the time they reached it, the stranger was soaked through despite the rapid pace he had maintained. He kicked at the door with his boot, calling out urgently, "Doc! Doc Morrison! I need help out here." The door swung open almost immediately, revealing a gray-haired man in his 50s with spectacles perched on his nose. His eyes widened as he took in the scene. "Tristan Jenkins, what have you got there?" he asked, stepping aside to let them in. "Found her trapped under the collapsed porch at the old Whitfield place," Tristan said, carrying Hannah through the door and into a small examination room. "Beams had her pinned. Leg looks bad, and she's got a deep cut on her arm." So his name was Tristan Jenkins. Hannah filed that information away as the doctor helped ease her onto the examination table. The warmth of the room after the cold rain made her shiver even more violently, and suddenly her mother appeared at her side as if conjured from thin air. "Hannah! Oh my God, Hannah!" Margaret Dalton's face was white with fear as she grabbed her daughter's hand. "Mrs. Chen from the laundry saw Tristan carrying you. What happened?" The porch collapsed in the storm, Doc Morrison said, already cutting away the wet fabric of Hannah's skirt to examine her leg. Margaret, I need you to step back and let me work. She's going to be fine, but I need space. Hannah watched through a growing fog as the doctor worked, her mother hovering anxiously nearby. But her eyes kept drifting to Tristan, who stood near the door, water dripping from his clothes onto the floor. He was tall, she realized now, probably over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who made his living through physical labor. His dark hair was thick and curling slightly as it dried, and his eyes were a deep brown that seemed to hold a warmth at odds with the storm raging outside. The leg's not broken, Doc Morrison announced, but it's badly bruised and you've got a nasty sprain. You're going to need to stay off it for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. This cut, though, that needs stitches. Hannah barely felt the sting of the needle as the doctor worked. Her attention was still on the man by the door, the stranger who had saved her life. He was watching her too, she realized, his expression concerned. Their eyes met and something passed between them. Something she could not quite name, but that made her breath catch in a way that had nothing to do with her injuries. How did you even know she was there? Margaret was asking him, her voice still shaking with the aftermath of fear. Tristan shifted his weight, looking almost uncomfortable with the attention. I was heading to the boarding house, actually. I just got into town this morning, and someone at the saloon said you had rooms available, saw the porch collapse from down the street and heard the scream. Just ran to help. You were coming to us? Margaret's voice had changed, becoming warmer. Well, you will have a room for as long as you need it, and I will not hear a word about payment. You saved my daughter's life. That's not necessary. Tristan started to protest, but Margaret cut him off with a firm shake of her head. It most certainly is necessary. Hannah is all I have in this world, Mr. Jenkins. There is no way to repay what you did, but I can at least offer you a place to stay. Doc Morrison finished bandaging Hannah's arm and looked up at her face, noting the pallor of her skin. She needs rest and warmth. Get her home and into dry clothes. I'll come by tomorrow to check on her. But she should be fine. She's lucky Mr. Jenkins was there. Lucky did not seem like a strong enough word. As Tristan helped carry her back out into the storm, which was finally beginning to abate, Hannah found herself studying his profile again. He moved with an easy confidence, unbothered by her weight or the weather, and she wondered what had brought him to Riverton. Cowboys and ranch hands came through town all the time, but there was something different about him, something she could not quite put her finger on. The boarding house was a 2-story structure that her father had built with his own hands, and it sat at the edge of town with a view of the mountains in the distance. Margaret hurried ahead to open the door, and Tristan carried Hannah up the front steps and into the warm, dry interior. The smell of baking bread filled the air, and Hannah felt a wave of relief wash over her at being home. Upstairs, first door on the right, Margaret directed, and Tristan climbed the stairs without hesitation. He laid Hannah gently on her bed, stepping back as her mother rushed in with towels and dry clothes. I'll leave you to it, he said quietly, heading for the door. Wait, Hannah said, finding her voice at last. It came out rougher than she expected, strained from the ordeal. Thank you. I don't know how to say it properly, but thank you for saving my life. Tristan paused in the doorway, turning back to look at her. A small smile crossed his face, the first she had seen, and it transformed his features from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip. Anyone would have done the same, he said simply. But anyone did not do it, Hannah replied. You did. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Hannah saw something flicker in his expression, something warm and complicated that made her wonder if he felt that strange connection too, that sense of recognition, despite them being perfect strangers. Then Margaret was shooing him out so she could get her daughter into dry clothes, and the moment was broken. But as Hannah let her mother fuss over her, helping her out of her wet things and into a warm nightgown, her mind kept returning to the man downstairs, Tristan Jenkins. She rolled the name around in her thoughts, testing its weight. She wanted to know everything about him, where he came from, what he was doing in Riverton, whether he would stay or if he was just passing through like so many others. That man is a miracle, Margaret said as she brushed Hannah's wet hair. I thought I had lost you when Mrs. Chin came running to tell me what had happened. The porch just gave way, Hannah said softly. It happened so fast, Mama. One second I was standing there, the next I was pinned. I thought I was going to die. Margaret's hand stilled in her hair, and when Hannah looked up, she saw tears streaming down her mother's face. Don't say that. I cannot lose you too, Hannah. You're all I have. Hannah reached up and squeezed her mother's hand. I'm here, I'm safe, thanks to him. Then we will do right by him, Margaret said firmly, wiping her eyes. He will stay here as long as he needs, and we will make sure he knows how grateful we are. True to her word, Margaret set up Tristan in the best room they had, the one at the front of the house with windows overlooking the street. Hannah heard her mother moving around downstairs, heard the low rumble of Tristan's voice responding to questions, and she wished desperately that she could go down and join them. But her leg was throbbing now that the shock was wearing off, and Doc Morrison had left her with strict instructions to rest. Sleep came in fits and starts, punctuated by dreams of collapsing porches and being trapped in the dark. Each time she woke with a gasp, her heart racing, and each time she had to remind herself that she was safe, that she was home, that a stranger with kind eyes had pulled her from the wreckage. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a world washed clean and bright. Hannah woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of voices downstairs. She sat up carefully, testing her leg, and found that while it still hurt, it was bearable. Against the doctor's orders and her better judgment, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, using the bedpost for support. Her mother appeared in the doorway just as Hannah was attempting her first step. Hannah Rose Dalton, what do you think you are doing? I cannot just lie in bed all day, Hannah protested. The boarding house needs running, and you cannot do it all yourself. I most certainly can, and I will. Get back in that bed this instant. But Hannah was stubborn, a trait she had inherited from her father, and she refused to be treated like an invalid. I will sit on the couch downstairs. I promise I will not walk on it more than necessary, but please, Mama, I will go mad if I have to stay in this room all day. Margaret sighed, recognizing the futility of arguing when her daughter had that particular set to her jaw. Fine, but you will let me help you down the stairs, and if I catch you putting weight on that leg, I will personally carry you back up here and lock the door. With her mother's support, Hannah made it down the stairs and settled onto the couch in the main sitting room. From here, she could see into the dining room where several of their boarders were finishing breakfast. She recognized most of them, ranch hands from the neighboring spreads who stayed in town during the week, but there was one new face at the table. Tristan sat at the far end, working his way through a plate of eggs and bacon with the appetite of a man who did hard physical labor for a living. In the morning light, Hannah could see him more clearly than she had in the chaos of the storm. He wore a simple shirt and suspenders, his hair still damp from what she assumed was a morning wash. He looked younger in the daylight, probably not more than 25, and there was something almost gentle in his expression as he listened to one of the other boarders tell a story. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and their eyes met across the rooms. A slow smile spread across his face, and he set down his fork, rising from his chair and walking into the sitting room. Miss Dalton, he said, his voice warm. How are you feeling this morning? Better, thanks to you, Hannah replied, acutely aware that she was in her dressing gown with her hair loose around her shoulders. It was hardly proper, but given the circumstances, she supposed allowances could be made. My mother tells me you are staying with us, if the offer still stands. She was very insistent last night, but I do not want to take advantage. You pulled me out from under a collapsed porch in the middle of a storm, Hannah said with a slight laugh that sent a twinge through her bruised ribs. I think we can manage to give you a room without it being considered taking advantage. Tristan's smile widened, and he pulled a chair over to sit near the couch. Fair enough. How's the leg? Sore, but the doctor says it will heal, and my arm is fine, just a few stitches. She paused, studying him. You are not from around here. No, I'm from Colorado originally. Been working ranches and doing odd jobs, moving around mostly. Heard there was work to be had in Riverton, so I thought I would try my luck. What kind of work are you looking for? He shrugged. Whatever pays. I am good with horses, decent with cattle, can fix things, build things. I am not particular as long as it is honest work. The Morrison Ranch is always looking for hands, Hannah offered. It's about 5 miles outside of town. Big operation. They run several thousand head of cattle. Pay is good from what I hear. I might look into that, Tristan said, but his attention seemed more focused on her than on the prospect of work. You look tired. Did you sleep? The question was asked with such genuine concern that Hannah felt something warm unfurl in her chest. I kept dreaming about being trapped. That's natural after what you went through. It will get better with time. He leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. I am glad I was there. When I saw that porch collapse, when I heard you scream, I have never run so fast in my life. Why were you even out in that storm? Hannah asked. Most people had sense enough to seek shelter. I had just ridden into town and was looking for a place to stable my horse. The storm came up faster than I expected. I was about to duck into the saloon when I saw the Whitfield place. He paused, his eyes darkening with the memory. For a moment, after the porch came down, I could not see you at all. I thought maybe I had imagined the scream. Then I got closer and saw your hand sticking out from under the beams, and I just knew I had to get you out. Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes at the matter-of-fact way he described what must have been a terrifying scene. Those beams were so heavy. I could not move at all. How did you manage to lift them? Fear gives you strength you did not know you had, Tristan said quietly, and I could not just leave you there. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the boarding house moving around them as her mother cleared the breakfast dishes and the other boarders prepared for their day. Hannah found herself not wanting him to leave, wanting to keep talking to him, to learn everything about this man who had appeared in her life like a force of nature. Your mother mentioned you run this place together, Tristan said eventually. Yes, since my father died 4 years ago. He was a miner, died in a collapse. The irony of her own near death by collapse was not lost on her, and she saw Tristan register it too. We needed income, so we turned our home into a boarding house. It is good work, and we meet interesting people. It seems like a nice life, Tristan said, but there was something wistful in his voice. Do you not have a home to go back to? Hannah asked gently. His expression shuddered slightly, and she immediately regretted the question. Not anymore. My parents died of fever when I was 19. I sold the family ranch to pay the debts and have been moving around ever since. That was 6 years ago. I am sorry. I should not have pried. No, it is fine. He smiled, but it did not quite reach his eyes. It was a long time ago. I have made my peace with it. Hannah doubted that was entirely true, but she did not press. Instead, she changed the subject. If you are looking for work, you should also check with the blacksmith. Old Mr. Hendricks mentioned last week that he could use an apprentice. His arthritis is getting bad, and he needs help with the heavier work. I will do that. Thank you. Tristan glanced toward the window where the sun was climbing higher in the sky. I should let you rest, and I need to go see about that job at the Morrison Ranch. Will you be back for dinner? The question came out more eagerly than Hannah intended, and she felt her cheeks warm. But Tristan did not seem to mind. His smile returned, genuine this time. I would not miss it. Your mother's cooking smells incredible. He stood, and Hannah had the irrational urge to ask him to stay, to keep talking, but she simply smiled and watched as he headed for the door. He paused there, looking back at her with an expression that made her heart race. I am glad you are all right, Hannah, he said softly, using her first name for the first time. Really glad. Then he was gone, and Hannah was left alone with the strange fluttering feeling in her chest and the certainty that her life had just changed in a fundamental way. The days that followed fell into a pattern that was both comfortable and charged with an undercurrent of anticipation. Tristan got the job at the Morrison Ranch and rode out each morning before dawn, returning in the late afternoon dusty and tired, but always with a smile for Hannah. True to the doctor's orders, she stayed off her leg as much as possible, spending her days on the couch with mending or bookkeeping while her mother ran the boarding house. But the highlight of each day was when Tristan returned. He would clean up and join them for dinner, sitting at the table and regaling them with stories from the ranch. He had a natural way of telling stories, making even mundane tasks sound interesting, and Hannah found herself looking forward to these evenings more than she cared to admit. So there I was, Tristan said one night, about a week after the storm, trying to convince this ornery bull that he really did want to go back into his pen. He had other ideas, chased me halfway across the pasture before I managed to get him turned around. The other boarders laughed, and Hannah could not help but smile at the mental image. Did you get him back in? Eventually, though my pride took more of a beating than anything else. Nothing quite like being outsmarted by 1,000-pound animal. Sounds like you had a typical day at Morrison's, one of the other ranch hands said with a knowing grin. That bull's been causing problems for months. Well, maybe I will have better luck with him tomorrow, Tristan replied, but his eyes were on Hannah as he spoke, and she felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. After dinner, as was becoming their habit, Tristan helped her mother clear the dishes and then joined Hannah in the sitting room. The other boarders dispersed to their rooms or headed out to the saloon, leaving them with a semblance of privacy, though Margaret was always within earshot in the kitchen. How is the leg feeling? Tristan asked, taking his usual seat in the chair beside the couch. Better every day. I walked to the kitchen and back today without any help. Hannah felt absurdly proud of this small accomplishment. That is good progress. Doc Morrison will be pleased. He paused, then added, though I have to admit I have enjoyed having you here in the evenings. It would not be the same if you were rushing around working. Hannah felt her cheeks warm. Over the past week, she had come to realize that what she felt for Tristan was not simply gratitude for him saving her life. It was something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken when he entered a room and left her thinking about him long after he had retired for the night. I have enjoyed it too, she admitted. It has been nice having someone to talk to in the evenings. Just nice? Tristan asked, and there was something playful in his tone that made her look up sharply. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken possibility. Hannah felt like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, knowing that if she stepped forward, everything would change. She could see in Tristan's expression that he felt it too, this pull between them that had been growing stronger with each passing day. More than nice, she said softly. Tristan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees and bringing himself closer to her. Hannah, I need to tell you something. Ever since that night in the storm, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. At first, I thought it was just concern, making sure you were healing properly. But it is more than that. Hannah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. What is it? I think I am falling for you, he said simply, his eyes never leaving hers. I know it is fast, and maybe it is crazy, but I cannot help how I feel. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up, and the last thing on my mind before I sleep. I look forward to coming back here every day just so I can see you, talk to you. And if you do not feel the same way, I understand. But I had to tell you. For a moment, Hannah could not speak. Her mind was racing, her heart full to bursting with emotions she had been trying to keep contained. But there was no containing them anymore, not when he was looking at her like that, with his heart laid bare in his eyes. I feel the same way, she whispered. I have been trying to tell myself it was too soon, that I hardly know you, but it does not matter. When you are here, everything feels right. When you are gone, I am counting the hours until you return. The smile that broke across Tristan's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of joy. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that was both tender and electric. Can I court you properly? He asked. I know I do not have much to offer right now, just a job at a ranch and a room in a boarding house, but I am a hard worker and I am good at saving money. Give me time and I will build something we can be proud of. I do not need grand promises, Hannah said, squeezing his hand. I just need you. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, simply looking at each other with the wonder of two people who had found something unexpected and precious. From the kitchen, Hannah could hear her mother humming softly, and she knew that Margaret was deliberately giving them privacy. Over the following weeks, as Hannah's leg healed and she was able to resume her duties around the boarding house, her relationship with Tristan deepened. He courted her in the old-fashioned way, with Sunday walks through town and picnics by the river that ran through Riverton. He brought her wildflowers he picked on his way back from the ranch, and he sat with her on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Hannah learned that Tristan loved horses more than any other animal, that he had a gift for gentling even the most skittish ones. She learned that he had taught himself to read, using an old Bible his mother had left him, and that he dreamed of one day owning a small ranch of his own. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that often caught her off guard, making her laugh at unexpected moments. And Tristan learned about Hannah. He learned that she had always wanted to see the ocean, but had never been further east than Denver. He learned that she loved thunderstorms, despite what had happened to her, loved watching the lightning dance across the sky from the safety of the porch. He learned that she was fiercely protective of her mother, and that she sometimes felt trapped by the responsibilities of the boarding house, even though she loved the work. They learned each other, slowly and thoroughly, building a foundation of friendship and respect that made their growing love feel solid and real. One Sunday in August, 2 months after the storm, Tristan took Hannah on a ride out to a spot he had discovered while working at the Morrison Ranch. It was a clearing high up in the foothills, with a view that stretched for miles across the Wyoming plains. They spread a blanket under a cottonwood tree and shared the lunch Margaret had packed for them. I have been thinking, Tristan said, as they sat watching the clouds drift across the vast blue sky. About the future. Hannah turned to look at him, her heart already beginning to race. What about it? I have been saving my wages from the ranch, almost all of them. I figure in another 6 months, maybe a year, I will have enough to buy some land. Nothing fancy, just enough for a small house and room for a few horses. Maybe some cattle eventually. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was thick with emotion. I want to build a life, Hannah, a real life with a home and a family, and I want to build it with you. Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes. Tristan, I know I should wait, he rushed on. Should court you longer, make sure you are certain. But I am certain. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Hannah Dalton. I fell in love with you the moment I saw your hand reaching out from under those beams, and I have fallen deeper in love with you every day since. Will you marry me? The tears were flowing freely now, but Hannah was smiling through them. Yes, yes, of course I will marry you. Tristan let out a whoop of joy that echoed across the clearing, and then he was pulling her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her dizzy. Hannah kissed him back, pouring all of her love and hope and dreams into that kiss, knowing that she was making a promise that would last the rest of her life. I do not have a ring yet, Tristan said, when they finally pulled apart, both of them breathless and grinning like fools. But I will get you one, the prettiest one I can find. I do not need a ring, Hannah said, but Tristan shook his head. You are going to have everything I can give you. A ring, a home, a good life. I promise you that. They spent the rest of the afternoon in that clearing, making plans and dreaming about their future. Tristan wanted to get married as soon as possible, but Hannah convinced him to wait until spring to give them time to save more money and to make sure her mother would be all right with the boarding house. She will need help if I am not there, Hannah explained. Maybe we can hire someone or find another woman who needs work and a place to stay. Whatever you need, Tristan agreed. I just want you to be happy. When they returned to town that evening, they announced their engagement to Margaret, who burst into tears and pulled them both into a fierce hug. I knew it, she said, laughing through her tears. From that first night, I knew. You two are perfect for each other. The news spread through Riverton quickly, as news always did in small towns. The other boarders congratulated them, and the townspeople who had watched Hannah grow up expressed their happiness at seeing her find love. Dr. Morrison declared that he had never seen a faster courtship, but that some people just knew when they had found the right person. The months that followed were busy ones. Tristan continued working at the Morrison Ranch, taking on extra hours whenever he could to boost his savings. Hannah worked at the boarding house and with her mother's help began assembling a hope chest of linens and household goods. They found a woman named Clara to help at the boarding house, a widow in her 30s who was grateful for the work and the place to stay. Tristan also began looking at land. He spent his Sundays riding around the area, scouting for the right spot to build their future. Finally, in October, he found it. 20 acres just outside of town, with good grazing land and a small creek running through one corner. It was more expensive than he had hoped, but the owner, an older rancher looking to sell off some of his property, agreed to let Tristan pay in installments. It is perfect, Tristan told Hannah, his eyes shining with excitement as he described it. The soil is good, there is water, and it is close enough to town that you can still help your mother when she needs you. I am going to start building our house as soon as the weather clears in the spring. Winter in Wyoming was harsh, and that year was no exception. The snow came early and stayed late, piling up in drifts that sometimes reached the windows of the boarding house. But the cold outside made the warmth inside all the more precious. Tristan and Hannah spent their evenings by the fire, planning their wedding and their life together. I want children, Hannah said one night as they sat close together on the couch, speaking quietly so as not to disturb the other boarders. At least 3 or 4. I want as many as you want to give me, Tristan replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. Our house will be full of noise and laughter. And chaos, Hannah added with a laugh. The best kind of chaos. They were married on a bright April morning in 1879, almost a year after the storm that had brought them together. The ceremony took place in the small church at the center of Riverton, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Hannah wore a dress that her mother had made, simple but beautiful, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Tristan wore a new suit, probably the finest clothes he had ever owned. And when he saw Hannah walking down the aisle toward him, his eyes filled with tears. Dearly beloved, the minister began, but Hannah barely heard the words. She was focused entirely on Tristan, on the love and promise she saw in his face. When it came time for the vows, his voice was steady and sure. I, Tristan Jenkins, take you, Hannah Dalton, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to build you a home and fill it with happiness. I promise to be your partner in all things, your support and your shelter, just as you are mine. Hannah's voice shook with emotion as she said her own vows, promising to love and honor Tristan, to stand by his side through whatever life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Tristan kissed her with such tenderness that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. The reception was held in the boarding house, with Margaret and Clara cooking a feast that seemed fit for royalty. There was music and dancing, laughter and joy, and Hannah felt like she was floating through it all, her hand firmly clasped in Tristan's. Happy? He asked as they swayed together during a slow dance, his arms around her waist. Happier than I ever thought possible. Hannah replied honestly. I love you so much. I love you too. From the moment I lifted those beams and saw your face, I knew my life was going to change. I just did not know how much. They spent their wedding night in the same room at the boarding house where Tristan had stayed for the past year, but it felt different now, sacred in a way it had not before. Tristan was gentle and patient, and Hannah fell asleep in his arms, feeling cherished and loved and completely safe. The next morning, they began their married life in earnest. The house Tristan had been building on their land was not yet finished, so they continued to live at the boarding house, but every spare moment was devoted to working on their home. Tristan had already framed out the structure, and now it was a matter of finishing the walls, the roof, the interior rooms. Hannah helped as much as she could, though Tristan insisted she not do any of the heavy lifting. She painted walls and hung curtains, planted a garden, and chose furniture from the few pieces they could afford to buy. Slowly, the house took shape, becoming a real home. By midsummer, it was finished enough to move into. The house was small, just 4 rooms, but it was theirs. They had a bedroom with a real bed that Tristan had built himself, a kitchen with a cast iron stove, a sitting room with a fireplace, and a spare room that they both secretly hoped would soon become a nursery. Their first night in the house, they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. We did it, Hannah said softly. We built a home. We built a life, Tristan corrected, pulling her close. And this is just the beginning. He was right. Over the next few years, their life together grew and deepened. Tristan's small ranch began to thrive. He started with just a few horses, using his gift for training them to build a reputation in the area. Soon, ranchers from all over the territory were bringing him their most difficult animals, knowing he could gentle them without breaking their spirit. Hannah divided her time between their home and the boarding house, helping her mother when needed, but primarily focusing on building their life. She kept a vegetable garden that produced far more than they could eat, selling the surplus at the market in town. She learned to con and preserve, to cook the hearty meals that Tristan needed after long days working with the horses. And in the winter of 1880, she discovered she was pregnant. The joy on Tristan's face when she told him was something she would never forget. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure delight before carefully setting her down and immediately apologizing for being too rough. I am pregnant, not made of glass, Hannah said with a laugh, but she was touched by his concern. I am going to take such good care of you, Tristan promised. You and our baby. You will want for nothing. He was true to his word. As Hannah's pregnancy progressed, Tristan doted on her, insisting she rest more, hiring a young girl from town to help with the heavier chores. He added on to the house, building a proper nursery with windows that let in the morning light. He carved a cradle from cottonwood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Their son was born on a warm September evening, arriving into the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence. Tristan was there for the birth, holding Hannah's hand and whispering encouragement, and when Doc Morrison placed the baby in his arms, Hannah saw her strong, capable husband break down in tears. He is perfect, Tristan whispered, staring down at the tiny red face. Absolutely perfect. They named him Thomas, after Tristan's father, and from the moment he entered their lives, he became the center of their world. Tristan was a devoted father, rising in the night to help with feedings, carrying Thomas around the ranch in a sling as he worked, talking to his son about horses and cattle and the way the wind felt in the high country. Hannah watched her husband with their child and fell even more deeply in love with him. This was the man who had saved her life in a storm, who had courted her with wildflowers and promises, who had built her a home with his own hands, and now he was the father of her child, and she could not imagine her life without him. When Thomas was 2, Hannah became pregnant again, and this time they had a daughter they named Hope. She was followed 2 years later by another son, Marcus, and then, to their surprise, by twin girls they named Grace and Faith. Their small house seemed to burst at the seams with children, with noise and laughter, and the controlled chaos Hannah had once dreamed of. Tristan expanded the house twice more, adding bedrooms and a larger kitchen, building on a covered porch where they could all sit together in the evenings. The ranch grew too, from a small operation focused on horses to a more diverse enterprise that included cattle and sheep. They were not rich by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. One evening in the summer of 1890, 12 years after the storm that had brought them together, Hannah and Tristan sat on that porch watching their children play in the yard. Thomas, now 9, was teaching his younger siblings to ride on a gentle mare. Hope was 7, bossy and brave, insisting she could do anything her older brother could. Marcus was 5, quieter than his siblings, but with a gentleness with animals that rivaled his father's. And the 3-year-old twins were getting into everything, as toddlers did. "Can you believe this is our life?" Hannah asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. Tristan wrapped his arm around her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Sometimes I still cannot. Sometimes I wake up and I am amazed that I get to have this. Have you?" "I think about that day in the storm," Hannah said softly. "About what would have happened if you had not been there. I would have died, Tristan, alone and afraid." "But I was there," Tristan said firmly. "And you did not die. You lived and we found each other, and we built all of this. That is what matters." Hannah turned to look up at him, seeing the boy he had been in the man he had become. There was gray starting to show at his temples now, and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "I love you," she said simply. "More today than the day we married, and I will love you even more tomorrow." "And I love you," Tristan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You are my heart, Hannah. You and these children, you are everything." They kissed as the sun set behind them, and in the yard Thomas pretended to gag while Hope told him to hush. The twins were too busy chasing a chicken to notice, and Marcus simply smiled, already understanding, even at his young age, that what his parents had was special. As the years continued to roll by, the Jenkins family became an integral part of the Riverton community. Tristan's reputation as a horse trainer spread far and wide, and people came from as far away as Montana to have him work with their animals. Hannah's garden became legendary, and she taught other women in town her techniques for preserving and canning. Their children grew up strong and healthy, each with their own unique personality. Thomas inherited his father's way with horses and eventually took over much of the training work. Hope, true to her name, was optimistic and fearless, the first to try anything new. Marcus became a skilled carpenter, building furniture and structures with a precision that amazed everyone. The twins, Grace and Faith, were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and moving through life as a unit. Margaret continued to run the boarding house with Clara's help well into her 70s, and Hannah made sure to visit her mother several times a week. The boarding house remained a fixture of Riverton, and over the years, countless travelers passed through its doors, each carrying away memories of Margaret's cooking and warm hospitality. On Hannah's 40th birthday, Tristan surprised her with a trip to Denver. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch and their children for more than a day, and though Hannah worried about leaving them, the older children assured her they could manage. In Denver, Tristan took her to the finest restaurant she had ever seen, with white tablecloths and crystal glasses. After dinner, he presented her with a small box, and when she opened it, she found a gold necklace with a single pearl pendant. "I know I promised you the prettiest ring I could find when we got engaged," Tristan said, his eyes twinkling. "And I did get you that ring. But I wanted to give you something else too, something to mark all these years we have had together. This pearl comes from the ocean you always wanted to see. I had it sent from California, and I had it set here in Denver. It is not much, but—" "It is perfect," Hannah interrupted, tears streaming down her face. "It is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." Tristan fastened the necklace around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. You are the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. You and the life we have built. I would not change a single moment of it. That night, in their hotel room overlooking the bustling streets of Denver, they made love with the same passion and tenderness they had shared on their wedding night. And Hannah thought about how far they had come from that stormy night when Tristan had pulled her from the wreckage, how what had started as a desperate rescue had become the greatest love story she could have imagined. When they returned to the ranch, they were greeted with hugs and kisses from their children, and the house felt even more like home than it had before. Thomas had a new foal he wanted to show his father, and Hope had sewn her first dress with the twins' help, though it was decidedly lopsided. Marcus had built a new bookshelf for the sitting room, complete with carved horses along the edges. Life continued its steady, beautiful rhythm. They had good years and hard years, times of plenty, and times when they had to tighten their belts and work extra hours. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated births, and mourned deaths. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1895, surrounded by her family, and both Hannah and Tristan grieved the loss of the woman who had welcomed Tristan into their lives with such open arms. But through it all, their love remained constant, a foundation that supported everything else they built. They grew old together, their bodies changing but their hearts staying young. Tristan's dark hair turned silver, and Hannah's face gained the lines of a life well lived. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love over wildflowers and quiet conversations on a boarding house porch. Their children married and had children of their own, and the ranch that had started with just 20 acres and a dream grew to encompass over 200 acres. The small house Tristan had built with his own hands became the heart of a thriving family compound, with additional structures built to house the growing family. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, the entire family gathered to celebrate. There were now grandchildren running everywhere, 14 in total, with more on the way. The tables groaned under the weight of food prepared by 3 generations of Jenkins women, and the air rang with laughter and music. Hannah and Tristan sat in places of honor, watching the celebration with joy and wonder. They were in their 70s now, but still active and engaged with life. Tristan still worked with horses, though he left the more demanding work to Thomas and the younger grandchildren. Hannah still tended her garden, though Hope and the twins did most of the heavy labor now. Who would have thought, Hannah said, looking around at all the people who existed because they had found each other, that a collapsed porch in a storm would lead to all of this. Tristan took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after 50 years of marriage. I would do it again in a heartbeat, lift 1,000 beams, face 1,000 storms if it meant finding you. You saved my life that night, Hannah said softly. And you saved mine, Tristan replied. Maybe not from a collapsed porch, but from a life of wandering without purpose, without love, without a home. You gave me everything that matters, Hannah. Everything. As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, painting the Wyoming sky in the same colors it had shown on their wedding day, Hannah and Tristan stood together on the porch of the house he had built for her so many years ago. Around them, their children and grandchildren laughed and talked, the sound of family filling the air. No regrets? Hannah asked, the question one they had asked each other countless times over the years. Not a single one, Tristan answered, as he always did. You? Not one, Hannah confirmed, leaning into her husband's embrace. This life, this love, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. They stood there together as darkness fell and the stars came out one by one to light up the vast Wyoming sky. And if someone had asked Hannah in that moment to name the greatest gift life had given her, she would have said it was not the 50 years of marriage or the 5 children or the 14 grandchildren, though she treasured all of those things. The greatest gift was the moment in a storm when a stranger heard her cry for help and refused to walk away. The greatest gift was Tristan, in all his forms, the young cowboy who lifted impossible weights to free her, the suitor who brought her wildflowers, the husband who built her a home, the father who loved their children with his whole heart, and the partner who had walked beside her through every season of life. The greatest gift was love in its purest and most enduring form. Tristan and Hannah Jenkins lived for many more years, continuing to be the heart of their family and their community. They saw their grandchildren grow up and begin families of their own. They weathered the Great Depression by pulling together as a family, the ranch providing food and shelter when so many others had nothing. They adapted to the changing times while holding fast to the values that had always guided them: hard work, kindness, and love. When Tristan passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1942 at the age of 88, Hannah grieved deeply but found comfort in knowing that their love had been complete. They had been granted 63 years together, far more than many couples received, and they had made every one of those years count. She lived for 5 more years without him, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the house always full of noise and love. She told stories about their early days together, about the storm and the collapsed porch, about the young cowboy who had lifted beams that should have been impossible to move, about falling in love over quiet conversations and wildflowers. And when Hannah Dalton Jenkins passed away in her sleep in the spring of 1947, her family laid her to rest beside Tristan in the small cemetery overlooking the ranch they had built together. On their shared headstone, beneath their names and dates, their children had inscribed a simple phrase: "In a storm, they found each other. In love, they found home." The ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family with each new generation adding their own chapter to the story. But they never forgot the foundation upon which it all was built: a young woman trapped under a collapsed porch, a cowboy who refused to give up, and a love that proved stronger than any storm. Years later, when Thomas Jenkins told his own great-grandchildren the story of how their family began, he would start it the same way every time. It was a stormy night in June of 1878, and your great-great-grandmother was fighting to stay alive under the weight of a collapsed porch. But then a stranger heard her cry, and everything changed. And the children would lean in close, eyes wide, knowing they were hearing not just a story, but a piece of their history, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest act of refusing to walk away when someone needs help. The wildflowers still grew every spring around the ranch, painting the fields in colors that would have made Hannah smile. And on quiet evenings, when the wind swept across the Wyoming plains, you could almost hear the echo of laughter from the porch, the sound of two people who found each other against all odds and built a love that lasted not just a lifetime, but generations. Their story became legend in Riverton, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But for those who had known Tristan and Hannah, who had seen the way they looked at each other even after decades of marriage, who had witnessed the empire of love they built from that first moment of rescue, it was no myth. It was simply the truth of what happens when two people meant for each other find their way together, when a split-second decision to help a stranger in need becomes the foundation for everything that matters. The boarding house where they met eventually closed, but the building still stood in Riverton, a historical landmark commemorating the role it played in bringing together two souls destined for each other. The old Whitfield place, where the porch had collapsed, was torn down years ago, but a marker stood on the spot, noting its significance in local history. But the real monuments to Tristan and Hannah Jenkins were not made of wood or stone. They were the lives they touched, the family they created, the love they shared so generously that it seemed to overflow and bless everyone around them. They were the values they passed down. That strength is shown not just in lifting heavy beams, but in lifting up the people you love every single day. That love is not just a feeling, but a choice, made over and over again through every season and every storm. Their story proved that heroes do not always ride in on white horses to save the day. Sometimes they walk through a storm because they heard someone cry for help. Sometimes they stay because they found something worth fighting for. And sometimes they build an entire life on the foundation of a single moment when they chose to be brave, to be kind, to be present when they were needed most. In the end, that was the true legacy of Tristan and Hannah Jenkins, not the ranch or the land or the material things they accumulated, but the reminder that love, real love, begins with the simple decision to show up for another person, to lift the weight they cannot carry alone, to refuse to walk away even when it would be easier, to build something beautiful from the rubble of what might have been tragedy. And on stormy nights in Wyoming, when the wind howled and the rain fell in sheets, the descendants of Tristan and Hannah Jenkins would think of their ancestors and smile, knowing that they came from people who proved that the strongest foundation you can build is love, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with answering a cry for help in the midst of a storm.